Welcome to SHOWstudio. It's our last roundup panel of the menswear season, and we're going to be talking about Paris. So in some ways it's kind of the big one, and that is purely almost just because of size, because there's so many different shows in Paris, and increasingly it's super, super diverse. So not only are you there for kind of the cool young designers, people doing stuff that's quite different, there's also kind of the mega luxury brands. So it's an interesting one to talk about. I don't think it has a kind of identity as a city in the same way as perhaps London and Milan do, but maybe that's kind of old-fashioned to think about it in that way at all. But before we kind of dive in to talk about specific shows and also some of the themes that came out of the week in general, I'll just let my wonderful set of boys introduce themselves, starting with you, Simon.
I'm Simon Chilvers, the men's style director at matchesfashion.com.
Hello, I'm Chodha and I'm a fashion writer.
I'm Darren, Skey, I'm the head of menswear at Harvey Nichols.
I'm Charlie Porter, I'm men's fashion critic at the Financial Times.
Really strong panel today. This is good. Okay, I'm going to throw it out there because, as I said, Paris is super diverse, so it's kind of hard to pick. Like when we did the Milan panel this morning, it's quite obvious you either start by talking about Gucci or Prada, but it's completely not the case with Paris. Like I have absolutely no idea what you all want to talk about. Gosha, because you're wearing it.
Yeah, but it's the obvious place to start, isn't it?
Let's start with Gosha then. Why do you say it's the obvious place to start?
Because it was the show that had the most kind of sense of like occasion around it,
yeah.
And in terms of like from the season before, like they changed the time slot, so it meant that more people would go. Ray Kawakubo was sat second row, Demna from Vetements was there. It became the show that people had to see,
yeah.
Which is kind of rare in menswear in that kind of way of event show,
yeah.
And I thought it was super good. I love Gosha, so I thought it was extraordinary.
What is it with the sort of the sudden spotlight on him? Because I was speaking to a buyer who said that they'd stocked his stuff for quite a long time. They ended up dropping it, and now they can't get it back. And that was about like 6 years ago, maybe 5 years ago.
Yeah, but that's the thing that probably was before he joined up with Comme des Garçons to have it produced. So Gosha, when he first started a very long time ago now, about 2007, 2008, I think. He had real problems producing the stuff in Russia, and then the export duty was so massive, it was actually completely impossible for him to make clothing. And what happened was that he stopped his label, and then Adrian from Comme des Garçons from Dover Street wanted to stock it, and so they came to an agreement where Com now produce it for Gosha, which is how it became this like low price point, accessible, super radical, super forward label. So that's why that probably happened. But the thing is that like the thing that Gosha has got is that actually yesterday we were talking about Palace and Supreme on the panel in terms of London and how their London, or Palace is a London label that isn't actually part of London Collections Men.
That's super weird because Supreme sent an invite out today for like an event in Paris.
Oh, really?
Did you guys get that? They sent it out like it was a fashion show. Oh, really? It came out and it was like Supreme with the day.
Well, maybe it's because there is this mood within fashion now, which is this accessible tier of fashion which connects with Supreme and Palace. Like the kids who are buying Gosha are 16-year-old, 17-year-old lads who queue up. They care about the clothes as much as
I was in Copenhagen a couple of weeks ago and went to Storm, and they had a 424 launch, but there was kids of 14 who had travelled 2 hours into Storm by when they were kitted out in Palace and Gosha.
Yeah.
I think that sort of says a lot about a brand when there's a younger market who are buying into it, who will probably stay with it for a number of years. I think that's key for a brand like this, to catch them young and then keep them on that journey all the way through.
And I think we talk a lot, or we know a lot, that if you're a 14-year-old girl, where you can go shopping. There are loads of options. But actually, if you're a 14, 15, 16-year-old kind of guy, there isn't really an awful lot of stuff out there for you to aspire to wear, or to, you're not even really encouraged necessarily to think about your clothes. It's just sort of, you just wear clothes. But with this kind of new world, as we've just heard, there is a sort of, everyone is into fashion now, and that's kind of, this kind of shift, and these sorts of designers now have a more relevance and more place because they actually have an audience that maybe wasn't sort of around in the same way.
But the thing is that menswear has always dealt with cultishness and dealt with teenage cultishness. So we'll talk about Raf at some point, and Raf always works on adolescence, and what Gosha is doing is working with actual adolescence rather than an idea of adolescence, which is why it's charming as well.
I also think it's an aesthetic thing. I think you're right with the parallels between Raf and Gosha in terms of the adolescent thing, but I also think Gosha, the aesthetic is much more kind of sporty, and I think if you think about obsessive shopping, at the moment it is in that category. It's like sneakerheads and things like that, and I think this just in terms of style. I know he's kind of moving away from that in certain aspects, but it is that kind of tracky bottoms t-shirts thing that speaks to the guy that will queue up to buy sneakers as well, in a way that perhaps other high fashion hasn't. Even Raf maybe hasn't.
Yeah, but also, why would you want a pair of trousers with a button on it? I mean, like you say, it's sporty, but that kind of is the most sensible way to dress right now when you need to wear a suit. I mean, it's called sporty, but actually, it's actually a younger generation finding their own way of dressing, which is separate from old. The interesting thing with this collection was that actually there was that top there on the stripe one. It was the first time Gosh that actually used design trickery, and I've used trickery as a compliment. I don't mean it as a negative, but there's actually 2 sleeves on that sweatshirt, and also some of the trousers. So you put your arm through the sleeve that's kind of here, and it means you have the kind of banging flap behind, and it's really clever how he captures that thing of like kids wanting their clothes to hang like that.
Yeah.
But on a garment where your hand comes out.
Still function on it.
It reminds me, when you poke your thumb through your jumper at school, and then you have the weird flap bit.
And it was so clever. It's one little touch. I mean, because Gosh is all about the cut of like the track pants are cut a bit like trousers, so they don't sit like horrible Abercrombie track pants. They sit as a really good track pant, and the cut's always a little bit sort of strange and awkward. And but this is the first time he's done design tricks.
Well, all that pulling up of the trousers and the track pants felt kind of awkward in a way that sort of seems to be going on in other places a bit, and that kind of teenagey, snarly thing, which obviously also is a bit Vetements, seemed to me to be a bit of a bubbling thing throughout Paris, actually.
But I think, sorry.
I was just going to say that the connection with Vetements is real as well, because Gosha was the first model out in the last women's wear show, and Gosha's friend and stylist Lotta is also the stylist on Vetements, and there's their friend Paul, the model, is part of the whole, and there is actually a community of friends, and there's this attitude which helped make Paris feel very new again, which is exactly what Paris needed.
It's definitely an attitude to the way that they walk and the way that it's styled, I think, that sort of feels quite new.
Lotta's a brilliant stylist. I think she's really amazing, and it's interesting to have a kind of new styling talent who's quite visible in a way. And it's not one of these relationships where the stylist goes in at the last minute and kind of pulls things off a hanger and arranges it. You feel like, as Charlie says, it's a real part of the collective, and that is really exciting because
it feels genuine, doesn't it? Like, you believe it. It feels very believable. I think that's the other appeal of these clothes to young people, is they feel believable. They don't feel like they're completely disconnected in a bubble of fashion.
But also the thing with Lotta as well is that she's been around a while. I mean, because Lotta actually was involved in early men's shows as Lotta Skey Electric. She did clothing for a while, and so she knows the industry as well. She knows how to not make any compromises, and she's kind of honed a way of existing which is separate from most stylists, and which kind of gives her an individual energy.
But I think we're also seeing that the stylist designer relationship kind of, with JW Anderson and exactly. There is that, JW Anderson, the label, would be very different without Ben there, same with Loewe, and I think this is a similar thing where you don't really know where the line is drawn between the two. They are just all working together, and that sense of a collective, as we've talked about with Vetements already, but even here with the stylist and the team and the casting, it all is on the same line. It's not really like a team that has been clunked together. If you think about it in X Factor terms, it's not like a kind of boy band or girl band where you just get lots of people that can sing allegedly and shove them together. There is a real kind of sense of purpose actually to what they're doing, and I think that's probably why it appeals so much to not only the press but to all of us, because it does feel authentic.
That's part of the reason I think that London has always felt very creative, is because there's a genuine sense of collaboration here, partly just because of the geography of it, of people's studios being so close, or people going to college together, and that's always felt like something that just wasn't there in Paris at all. Like there wasn't that sense of kind of like helping each other out, collaboration. But
this isn't in Paris. I mean, this is the thing that Paris always does. Paris fashion is where people come from. The thing that Gosha has as well is an absolute gleeful grasp of fear of Russia. But also pride in Russia. But he also understands that like it's terrifying to those who don't understand Russia, and that's why there's the Cyrillic everywhere, and he really understands that, and I think he kind of finds it funny that we find his country scary or don't understand it or don't know it, and that tension is there in all of the clothes, and he uses it very well to create a new language.
Should we jump from Gosha to talking about Raf? Because as we said, there is a kind of that parallel in the youth obsession.
Yeah.
And this collection was particularly interesting because it really was like a complete youth fest. Like Raf gave that list when you came in of all the different kind of references and ideas, many of which are kind of very long-term references of his. A lot of people are saying it's a kind of David Lynch collection, which it is in a way, but also, you know, he'd referenced his own collections within that list, so it was quite an interesting one. But it felt a bit like a greatest hits in some ways, which felt very apt given that he's just moved on from Dior and is obviously like thinking about what he's doing and what he's standing for. You loved it, didn't you? You always loved Raf, but...
I mean, I was just really excited to be in a maze made of wood. And it took me a while to kind of calm down from that initial excitement.
Where were you in the maze?
Helen and I were just sort of at the side, so we were in a really good spot as they would come around a corner, and you could sort of see from the reaction of people there that they were coming, so you were sort of ready.
Because basically there was no seating. They constructed a maze of like corridors that you had to work out through where the lighting was positioned, where was the best place to stand. And I chose the worst place.
I couldn't see a thing.
Ours was alright, wasn't it?
We had a really good spot,
Quite narrow.
So why was yours so bad?
Oh, because I ended up chatting with someone and didn't go further in. I love a maze as well, so I should have gone further into the maze. I only went after the show that I realised how
I
amazing the maze
went
was.
further in and got stuck in a tiny little corner, and before you know it, they're round the corner walking past you.
And you were
So
just
you
stuck
don't
in
get
the
you get
maze,
2 seconds to see what's walking past.
But
But
I
it's
love-
interesting for the catwalk pictures. There was an area where they
Yes.
walked straight forward, so you'd actually see the
You
pictures.
don't get
but
the sense
but
of it
we
at
were in
all.
this like as if we all stood up and like kind of went like funny.
Yeah,
angles.
you kind of get the sense of it there.
But also that really added to the mood of the clothes. The fact that the boys were kind of having to almost twist their bodies to brush past you.
Yeah.
And they were literally brushing past you with this kind of quite youthful arrogance, if you like. It really did. I mean, it just goes to show that as much as we talk about experiencing fashion shows online in different ways, there are those designers that still understand that for invited guests or people that have to be there or are there, you kind of need to give them something as well. And I think Raf did that really, really well, because it did kind of change how you felt about a lot of the clothes, because I went back and looked at it afterwards, and as Charlie says, when it was shot against just kind of the cleaner background, it kind of looked very differently at the clothes that I had seen. They didn't necessarily look like the clothes that I felt had just brushed past me. And I think that's kind of something that is quite interesting. And so we're going to talk about Dries, I'm sure, but that idea of a happening, I think is something that Raf definitely.
Well, because a lot of people have made these things this season where they were like, oh, you know, and from the very first season that Raf stopped seating people at his shows, where they were like, oh, he's subverting the fashion show, you know, he's refusing to go along with it. And I don't feel like it is that at all. I think it's just making the fashion show relevant and exciting and
gives you a different
modern
perspective of the products as well if you're standing eye level with it. You know, rather than looking up or trying to sort of look across, it just gives you a completely different perspective.
You engage with it differently, and it feels like one thing that I love as well is the way he did this with the very first time that the seating was away. It was when it was super dark and they used all the red lights.
The flashing trainers.
And the flashing trainers. What I loved is that the models came round multiple times, but sometimes you weren't sure whether they had come down multiple times, so you were like, have I seen this before or not? And I think he's really good. Obviously, like, referencing is such a big part of what he does, and like repetition and, you know, bringing things out from his own work. And I kind of felt that all tied into it, where it was such a strong statement just in terms of like thinking about things properly, seeing things again. Why do you only look at something once? It can come past twice, and it's quite menacing as well.
If you scroll down to the bottom, there was actually you could see the top of the sheet he handed out, because one of the interesting things was his overt mention of Martin Margiela. And it was Martin Margiela, not Maison Martin Margiela. And I hope we're not going to talk about the Maison Margiela show because it's relevant, and it was really interesting in a season where the Margiela itself, the label, is just off. To have a designer talk about Martin Margiela himself, and to talk about scale and oversize and the effect that man had on Raf and his career so
there's that brilliant thing on
the Gentlewoman
thing,
which Raf is part of, which everyone should read. There's a piece on a Maison Margiela show which Raf has given quotes to in the New Gentleman.
And it's like an oral history.
It's
It's
an amazing oral
absolutely
history.
amazing.
But so if you see that these oversized sweaters, like these extraordinary garments, and the oversized coats, this is all talking about Martin Margiela and Martin Margiela's design ideas and how far he pushed things. I mean, after the show, I went backstage to look at the clothes, and Raf doesn't normally say anything. Or there was one time I went, there was a queue of people saying hello, and I tried to ask a question. I was told no questions, like really. But there was a kind of huddle around him, so I kind of joined it, and someone asked a question and he just started talking, and it was 2.5 minutes with him talking about the collection, and he said eventually, I didn't mean to talk about this, but he seemed so happy with the collection to talk about it. He seemed really with it in a way, and I think this is probably down to the fact that he's out of Dior and can focus on this and really feel part of it, and I think that did then really come across in the collection. It was interesting how the collection wasn't some sort of statement or triumphalist thing or anything. It just seemed like a really, really deep, excellent Raf collection, which he maybe hasn't been able to do for a while.
No, definitely. What do we think of? I was thinking a lot about it because of the fact, I kind of brought this up already, but the fact that he referenced 4 of his own collections in that list. It was like, I'm going to forget all of the names of all of them because I'm terrible with that. It's like the Virginia one, the one that's those who spit in the something, beware the fear generation, that one. But I was thinking about kind of designers reference, they were right at the bottom of that, babe, so you won't see it, thanks though. Like when designers referencing themselves, and I had this weird idea where I was like, it's really weird that designers don't redo collections that they did in the past. You know, we're all talking about like the way that seasons are changing and things that are radical. And I was like, if he did, you know, if he brought out Spring Summer 2004 now and just remade the whole collection.
Well, they do redo things on a commercial level, as
but not as like a
shapes that work.
You know.
They'll just keep making them. They just don't show them, I guess. But the difficulty with doing that now, I guess, is that within seconds you can just whip up the original, and you've got all these amazing kind of fashion heads, you know, kids in the middle of Canada or whatever on Tumblr who are just going, what? We've seen this before. Do something new. So the critics' eye, you know, there are so many more people, critics in inverted commas, that are commenting on this stuff. And I guess a designer, it's quite scary to do that, to kind of go backwards, because we're always talking about looking forward and newness and going forward. And I think that's why probably this collection read so well for so many of us, is because it felt weirdly recognisable and comfortable.
But
it felt comfortable.
I think it was also because it was personal. It was so personal to him, and I would love Raf to do this level of character and personal feeling in women's wear, because I think in menswear he really connects to something that feels very true. At the beginning, the music was Angelo Badalamenti talking about how he and David Lynch wrote I think it's Laura's theme, one of the pieces of music from Twin Peaks, and it was just extraordinary to hear him talking about a thing that affected my childhood so much, and Raf's, and therefore connected to this collection as well.
Do you think part of the problem is that what makes him such a great designer is he really understands masculinity and male youth? And I did actually quite like what he did at Dior, but I don't think he understands femininity and being a woman or growing up as a woman, whereas he so clearly understands even things like...
I suppose the difference is that he's never actually done Raf Simons women's wear. He's done luxury house women's wear. So I don't know whether what it would mean for him to do Raf Simons women's wear.
Interesting going about the spoken word. I mean, something I pick up is always about the show music and the elements, but 3 different shows, and I can't remember the third, but Off-White.
That was me, the Off-White one. It was me interviewing Peter Saville.
Okay, so...
That's so famous!
Let's reference that now.
Yeah.
But no, it's interesting how you had 3 different shows with spoken word rather than actual music this time, which again gives you a different dimension to the show. You know, 'cause you're actually thinking about what's being said and you're trying to reference that to the show. And
Virgil actually said that backstage when people were asking what it is, because it was a SHOWstudio interview with Peter Saville from our In Fashion series, and he was like, I just felt like, you know, he said what I wanted to say, and Virgil does that quite a lot with others and other people's work. It just feels interesting, and it feels quite modern, and it feels like it's kind of getting away with that awful thing where everyone rushes backstage after a show and is like, so what was it about, and they take like any soundbite. I think it's nice, that kind of... You liked the Off-White show, actually.
I loved the Off-White show.
Really strong.
It was great. And the interesting thing was, because Gosha had moved from... Gosha used to be the first thing you saw on the Wednesday of Paris. And it's nice to start Paris with a palette cleanser, because we've just come from Milan, where it's a bit like, oh my God, like, really? And it's nice to get to a city where there's creativity.
Clear through all that gloss.
And Milan's getting better, though.
Sure. And so the thing with Off-White is it was in the stock that Gosha was in, and he did such a great job, because he really looked at tailoring in a completely fresh way, especially that one there, which is a herringbone coat over a jacket with a wide pant but with a little zip underneath, and it looks so fresh.
That was nice, a repetition of fabrications throughout the whole outfit. That was really strong.
And it was such a, I mean, it's not perfect, obviously, like we've seen those ring pulls of Raf, and you know, it's not complete
at the moment. Talented at doing, he's really pushing people away from that, and this was a great chance for him to actually move people. But he's still got accents of the chevron on there, which should still remain the commercial part of his collection.
Yeah.
But there's so much more around it this time. You said from the suiting to the outerwear was extremely strong. What we try and do sometimes is you see retailers who go heavy on the chevron.
Yeah.
Because it is that commercial element, but we try and buy things a little bit more
because then that brand can grow,
different.
I guess,
because that sort of thing can drop off.
Yeah.
I was going to say the same about Gosha just now when we were talking about that. How much longer, how many years do you think that's going to be as relevant as it?
Well, the thing is, he involves novelty with each season, so it's not a reliance on one logo.
Yeah.
I mean, the interesting thing about Off-White is how Virgil grows it, and if it will be in the Givenchy model where it's selling t-shirts, sweatshirts, but with this other stuff that is there as well, but actually the stuff that sells us here, or whether he will actually be able to sell the tailor and sell this other stuff.
I always just think of it when I think of. I love what Virgil does, and he's super clever. I really like him just as a guy. I think he's great. But I think what I think of is also like it is, and it's interesting what you said about Gosha. It is dangerous in a way because you think Marcelo Ballon, where that was like everyone was like, "This is amazing, this is really cool," got so much buzz, and now not relevant. I don't think does very well. It's not exciting, and that's just what I worry about with a Gosha. And I know they're very different beasts, but Gosha and Virgil, do you think how do you stay relevant?
By being an individual designer. I mean, like they're individual designers doing individual stuff. I mean, this collection here has got so much thought in it. Like we've now come down to 4 closing looks of not one colour and a long coat, which is not. If you were to say what is Off-White going to show, you would not. And you would not say that.
She knocked up the night before.
Really?
Did all those canvas pieces the night before.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, but it feels in that way. It feels like an actual fashion show. It's not a planned. Okay, let's do that. Let's do that. It's an actual. Okay, all right, let's do this.
And he really kept Savile audio when there was like so many less chevrons. And when you think Peter Savile, you think Hacienda chevrons, and then there weren't that many chevrons.
It was kind of the set's Hacienda, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And I guess he's got the CMYK as well at the end, so it's kind of got that.
It's got
reference of the palette.
Yeah. Are you an Off-White fan?
I enjoyed this show actually, and I also thought that it had that kind of sense of let's move it on from this whole sports luxe thing that everyone's been talking about for ages. And I actually thought that a lot of Paris felt like designers were trying to move on from that whole tracksuit trainer obsession that we've had for quite a long time.
I didn't feel like they were moving on from it. What I felt like they were doing was showing it worn, how people wear it, which is like, because it felt much less like a styling trick or like an aesthetic that they were adopting, and much more like, oh, actually these are garments that everyone wears every day, and yes, they do wear them sometimes with like a tailored coat or what have you, so we're going to show them less like a trend and more like a genuine proposition. So that was quite refreshing, and I felt that at this show. Who else should we talk about? Dal, any highlights?
Dries.
Let's talk about Dries. It was, as show goes, this was the most like beautiful show. I thought, like, it was such a spectacle. It was really amazing.
In terms of the venue or the clothes?
Venue and the clothes. The clothes, it is what it is, like in a way. And I kind of like that with Dries. I like that kind of consistency in terms of venue and show. It was a show.
Yeah, the show was extraordinary.
Yeah, and I think that's I think that's kind of one of those really important things to take away from going to these shows is kind of how they are presented, because we do all of us even rely on the photographs straight after the show, even when you're there, because quite often you can see them better in the photographs than you can when you're there. But that sense of creating a mood, I think the gasps that the whole audience kind of gave when the curtain was raised and you saw the photographer's bit, that was really kind of very Dries. And
we should explain what it was, because it was basically we were led around the back of we entered to the back of the opera house, Garnier, and our seats were on the stage, and the curtain was down, and when the show started, the curtain was raised and the photographers were the other side of the...
Which I thought was so witty, because it was like the photographers were the main act, which what you were saying about image.
So you can see in that image there, that shows the bow at the end. We were facing out, we were either side of the auditorium. And
he'd been waiting years to actually get this venue, hadn't he?
Like 10, 15 years. Yeah.
But then... it's interesting though, because I always find certain irony with Dries shows, because if you think, I feel like there's so much of the current fashion system that Dries opts out of, in terms of like the way he sells, the way he makes clothes, the way everything you see you can buy, all of that is very kind of, it doesn't advertise, like refusing to kind of play the game in certain ways. But when it comes to the show, he's like Instagrammable moments, like everything being really, it feels
But I think
kind of
he does.
at
I think he
odds.
does it because it's an amazing moment rather than Instagram.
Yeah.
He doesn't do it because it's for
I
Instagram.
don't
He does it
think
because
so,
we're
yeah.
there to enjoy it, actually with your own.
Yeah, but do you know what I mean? It's weird.
No.
This feels so.
No, I don't. I feel like that was if he'd have done
He's
that show
been
in
doing that for a long
1987,
time,
then it would have been amazing.
I just mean like
we did. It's like no, I don't.
I just mean like I wouldn't expect him to do like a big show.
But
like
he
you'd
does-
expect him to do something quite
No, he does.
discreet.
No,
in a way.
he likes creating a humble, grand moment.
Yeah.
Like it's a gesture.
That's a really good way of putting it.
It's a gesture. My great problem with this was I just thought it was a really average Dries collection,
Yeah.
and so it was in this amazing space, and I couldn't wait for the show to finish.
Aw.
Because to me, Dries is about the body and the way the fabric connects with the body and the flow, and
Which has been so good at the last two
The
or three
last
shows
two,
with
Exactly, yeah.
the
The dancer one was-
yeah,
and
Yeah.
exactly. And this had a weight to it which I couldn't get past.
It
So
just felt too long. It didn't feel very edited.
yeah,
It just felt like a mash of things. I didn't get the psychedelic stuff at all.
which was stuff done by an artist whose name I can't
Who
remember.
used to make posters.
and,
Yeah, the
and
posters,
he's really
yeah.
done stuff for. I mean, and the thing is that like I say this in complete like. It doesn't matter. Like people will still buy it. Dries will still continue. It's not like we're here judging him. Like, oh no, he's in trouble or anything. It just for me wasn't a collection that I was.
Enamoured with.
Yeah.
It was like it's a curriculum in styling. It's kind of
Yeah.
layers and different proportions and.
But styling that didn't then work on a body because.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of everything. I had one extra thing on top of it that I
Yeah.
guess masked what we are often used to seeing from Dries. But again, he's an incredibly commercial designer, so all of those things separately on a hanger will do really, really well. And I think
Yeah.
he's one of the those showpieces, if you like. Not that he doesn't particularly, but the printed stuff or the embroidered
Yeah.
things always seems to kind of sell.
Yeah, absolutely.
As well as
Yep.
all of the kind of knits and all of the kind of easier things that he does that we know him for. So for that, I thought it was.
It's interesting.
Yeah,
all those
consistent.
little bits that you're talking about, all
Yeah.
those sort of ornate bits, they're the bits that fly out as soon as they come in the store. They don't last more than a couple of days.
And is
in
it like
store.
the same shopper that comes back for them season in
It's
season
an
out?
absolute loyal shopper. without
Really?
a doubt.
And
That's
the
interesting.
thing with Dries as well is that he's extraordinary. He at the exhibition that was at the Art
Yeah, it's the
Equity,
best
Yeah.
thing ever.
and part of that was film of him in India and the people he works with in India, and he works with people to make sure they're paid properly,
Yeah.
that they're not exploited, that they're part of the creation of the garments. It's not like he ships something off like a lot of people and and doesn't pay them any respect.
Yeah.
So Dries is he's great, and he's a model for sustainability in that sense, and respecting those who make clothes.
It's really interesting that the three designers we picked to talk about, like Gosha, Raf and then Dries, it's all designers who very much kind of opt about not only like their aesthetic, but they have a very clear idea of what kind of fashion game they're willing to play. And I think this season I really felt like those who have a very sure idea of how they're willing to operate within the system and what they want from it, their aesthetics are stronger because of it. And I think that really felt apparent to me this season, where the ones where it felt like they're just kind of go along with it and
But that's
aren't
true in all
making the
fashion,
decisions.
yeah. Like individuality counts for everything,
Yeah.
and knowing your brand and knowing who you are and knowing how you can push it as well.
I think the one brand that didn't get sort of the sort of crowds going to it was Mahara.
Yeah.
Mahara Yasuhiro, who I think exactly what you're saying there, stays very true to what he does. He's an absolute master in his craft. But he sometimes he seems to be pushed in there sort of out of the limelight a little
Yeah,
bit. And
for sure.
yeah, I thought his show for me was probably the best show that I saw in Paris.
Why do you think it gets pushed out the limelight?
I don't know. I can't quite work it out. I'm not sure what it is about him. Maybe because of he's such a quiet, reclusive character that he doesn't push his brand enough. But I think from the actual show point of view and the detailing, the work involved behind the product, it's phenomenal. I thought. And you see this every season. We've been a bit of a backer of this for a number of years now.
Yeah.
And we're seeing it grow and grow and grow, but maybe not to the extent that I think it really should. And it's interesting. Some of the people who were there, were really raving about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't there, but I wouldn't have. I would have not. I wouldn't have. This doesn't make me want to go.
But it also, from I guess connecting retail and press, it doesn't seem to have a lot of support from the press. You never really see it in magazines and things. But
No.
I've known about it for a long time as well, but from a retail point of view, but never really seen it or even been impelled to kind of write about it or talk about it. But I know it exists and I like it. But I think that's the difficulty, is that there is so much to talk about and so
And to
much to
see.
look at, that there are some
And
designers
also,
that fall
press
through
all
the
latch
cracks.
onto the same things as
No,
well.
we don't. We latch onto things that are the right things to latch on. I mean, like, it's like, I don't understand what the scale
I think
of these
they
things are.
they
Like,
do in
it's
a way. Like, there's certain journalists who set the pace of what is good, and then a lot of journalists then latch onto those. You can see that from like a Gosha show. Like, there's people, everyone, as you said, it's like the show to go to now. But he was championed at the start by a lot of select people. I think it's, if you started going to this and raving about it to everyone, I guarantee more people would start going to it.
I don't know what that
Which you-
means,
which you
because I
won't
would.
do,
But the thing is that makes it sound like I go to things piecemeal and talk about them. I don't think that. I don't agree with you. I don't agree with you, basically. Sorry. I don't want to be subjective.
No, I really like it.
Yeah.
What else should we talk about?
Can we talk about Junior Watanabe?
Of course we can. You liked it a lot, didn't
I
you?
thought it was extraordinary. It was Junior.
Charge my phone.
Yeah, exactly. Junior had a difficult season last season because a lot of people found his use of African material difficult, even though it's African material that was made by a Dutch company. And I think he was talking about how a European company had effect on Africa. But anyway,
I don't think it was the
last
material, I think it was the presentation.
Okay.
Yeah,
But-
but I agree with you, that material story got a bit lost in
Yeah.
the melee.
But so he's had a difficult couple of seasons, and so for Junior to come out with something so fresh and so kind of compelling, what he did was, you actually don't see it as much from the front, and it's on the early looks or at the end. He had solar panels in the clothes,
Yeah.
and they were put in the clothes in the way to make it so they weren't. I mean, obviously some had them on the back,
Yeah.
but they were integrated into the garments so that they could be like a believable, understandable garment. And the solar panels, after 5 hours, would have enough charge to charge a phone or something. And it was such an eloquent touch.
It would be if
so
you could
he's
actually
that
have
one.
the product with the solar panels in.
Some of them you can. No,
it's
some of
it's
you
two
can.
pieces, I think.
Some of you can. It's
Yeah.
true. But the thing is so basically that coat there, which has got a solar panel on the back, you have to buy the solar panels separately.
Yeah.
For the pic.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is that like at least he's making an effort to do
Absolutely.
it, and
Yeah.
he's addressing something and showing something which maybe we should all be doing. Like,
But it's weird, isn't it? Because wearable tech is, I feel like it's not a new thing at all. Like, wearable tech's been around for ages.
Such a horrible
Like,
phrase.
wearable tech, you think of like an...
I love this show because it's so Zoolander as an idea. You know,
Yeah.
this is the sort of thing that
Yeah.
all of the people that we know that don't necessarily
Yeah, work in
understand what
fashion
we
and
do
feel
think,
like-
oh my god, you know, you could plug these
Yeah.
chargers on the back. But there was something, as Charlie said, so real and elegant about the way that these panels had been integrated into the back of these beautiful coats. So even if you took them
Yeah.
off, which obviously in retail level most of them probably won't come with those panels, they were still really great. And I
Yeah.
think that's what I really loved about it, is that it's an idea that you could easily dismiss. And you know, leading on to wearable technology, a lot of it I think we're still kind of quite
Seems
unsure
super
about.
gimmicky.
Yeah, it just
But it's
seems
weird
really...
that luxury brands don't really engage with it, because you think, why haven't like Burberry made a bag where you put your phone in it and it charges?
Because it costs too much money to do it. I mean,
Yeah.
I think didn't Richard Nicol try and do it?
He
with some
did it,
ones?
yeah,
he
I mean,
did,
it's,
yeah.
the technology isn't there. That's the basic truth.
But there is technology that, like, I think that luxury brands should be playing with it with a lot more, but it's just like they feel like somehow it's not luxurious to engage with that kind of technology.
I don't know enough about the fabric to know, but the other thing about the show as well was like the cut of the pants and the jacket brought back this kind of ergonomic sense that Junior
Yeah.
has so well. And I think it's what Junior customers love.
Yeah.
Is that sense of a kind of zippy, kind of like you put it on and you're in the city and you can be on your bike and you know it feels
smart.
like it's
Yeah.
smart, but it feels like it feels I don't know, it had energy to it, and
It just felt the most Junior collection out of the last year and a half.
yeah.
Yeah.
We were saying last year, as fun as the one was last year,
Yeah.
with the guys all sort of dancing in
I
the suits,
loved
etc. It was a
that.
beautiful show, but in
It
terms
didn't
of
sell.
how retail,
Yeah.
absolutely
It was a
didn't at
disaster.
all.
Yeah. It was just all formal, wasn't it? So it's
Yeah, there's nothing else to it.
I mean, also by this point in Paris, which was the Friday, I think, it was becoming really clear that the story of the season was double-breasted coats or
Yeah.
outerwear
Yeah.
in quite an understandable, straightforward way. So this show really was a kind of coalescing of the mood of the season.
Yeah.
It was so believable, and so like you wanted to look like that straight away. So
Yeah.
it was a great show for Junior.
Should we jump from Junior to Com,
Course,
which I also
yeah.
thought was a really,
Yeah.
really good show?
I thought it was
What
extraordinary.
did everyone else think of Com?
I mean, I thought it was the most extraordinary show. Like the thing about the show was that before it they were like, oh, you'll know what it's about. Like it's quite clear. And when it started, I was like, oh, what is it about? But what it was about was a very simple, humble again message of peace, because she was using armoured sleeves, but in soft patterned fabrics. And as it came out, you'll see that each look doesn't really change that much from the one before. But it was this slow build message of these men walking around in a square in quite a slow pace and kind of dotting around the square. And then some with flowers in their hair by Julien Dice, who always does their headpieces for Com. And it was just such a powerful message, and it's that old thing of like, say what you can say. Yeah. And so it wasn't protest, it wasn't a political statement, it was just one woman's statement of peace, which was so powerful.
Really tight and quite controlled as well, I guess. That's kind of one of the messages. It kind of felt like a real...
Well, there's a real intimacy to Com shows.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and I thought it was it's my favourite Com show that I've seen. Yeah. I loved it so much.
That one particularly on the right with the with those colours together, it's extraordinary, and the texture in the fabric. It's a real extraordinary. The interesting thing with Com as well is that the further she moves away from clothing and women's wear, and the women's shows have increasingly been not about garments but creations. But the menswear, she sticks to exploring formality in clothing, and actually she talks about wanting to show the purpose of the jacket,
which is strange if you think about it, because didn't she say recently about the women's wear that she just didn't have any clothes that she wanted to make, and that's such a kind of strong idea in terms of kind of abandoning making clothes for women but still having a passion for it in terms of the men's. It's kind of strange, but
I think she has absolute respect for the basic design of the jacket, and I think it's Anne Hollander, and I'll probably get this wrong, but Anne Hollander in Sex and Suits says it's the most perfect garment that's ever been created. Yeah, I think she has respect for the design of it. Yeah, and whereas in women's wear that garment hasn't been created. So
you're right. Actually, there's not that kind of one amazing garment that you can just play with time and time again. Yeah. And the garments that do exist for something like that, like a dress, it feels out of step with society, whereas there is still something about.
Well, our relationship to the suit, to the man suit, is so loaded with so many different. We all kind of bring something different to it, and I guess we've talked a lot about this.
It's also the ultimate performance of masculinity.
Much more, yeah, exactly, and I think there's something quite formal about what she does as well, which is kind of very refreshing to see, because it's formal but not in a way that feels kind of stuffy or old. It does, demand. It makes you think. You have to kind of look at it for a bit longer to kind of get it, and it does have this respect for craft and tradition and all of that stuff that so many designers throw onto press releases all the time. But here, it's authentic. It's got authenticity there.
There's a lot of things we haven't talked about. We haven't talked about Balmain.
Let's talk about Balmain.
Let's talk about Balmain. What did we all think of Balmain?
I thought it was great.
Really?
Yeah, I thought it was great. I thought it was a real show, which was like really rare in menswear. Yeah. To have like a sense of occasion.
Do you mean in terms, like, same as you asked me about, Jace, do you think in terms of the show or the clothes?
Well, it was high voltage and energy, and like, this is what we are.
Yeah.
I thought the work that went into it was kind of amazing.
Yeah.
And I thought that, like, why the hell not?
It's kind of good old-fashioned camp, and I think that's kind of going. Everyone's kind of so tasteful all of a sudden, and we all want oversized sweatshirts, and we all want to look like we don't care. Whereas there's something kind of quite wonderful about looking like you care. And I think particularly, let's not, but in a post-Yeezy world, there is a huge audience for this, and that's way more exciting to look at than a lot of things that we might think of and talk about. So that impact, this kind of high octane, the crassness is just fantastic. I think that's kind of what needs to stay. Whether it's my bag or not, or whether it kind of needs to fill up newspapers and magazines, I don't know. But as a thing, I think it totally needs to exist.
What he's done for diversity is so important and does not get talked about enough. Like, he's one of the only black designers. He talks about it. He champions not just different beauty, but like different body shapes. I think he speaks to people who maybe never felt like they were spoken to by luxury fashion. I think it's so important, and it doesn't get talked about enough because people like to kind of ridicule him and sneer.
For sure.
But then there is one thing that I find quite weird about it, which is in some ways it's like the most modern house in the world in the way he operates, like the social media, like all those like
Instagrammable moments.
all of that, exactly. It's so modern, and he talks about like the new world, the new fashion, the new luxury. It's all new, modern. But then the clothes are so old, like it's so old-fashioned. It's like old-fashioned ideas of masculinity, old-fashioned ideas of femininity, and I find it intriguing, but I love it.
But it's interesting because the thing is that actually when did someone do this look? Because actually the jacket is short to show off the butt, because the trouser is important. The pant cut is taken from leather pants to show off the butt, to show the body.
Yeah.
Like the cut, everything is completely 21st century.
Yeah.
It's that thing when people say, "Oh, this looks old," but it's like, no, it looks right for now.
I don't mean historical. I just mean old-fashioned in terms of like a man being macho and a woman being...
sure, but
like,
yeah, okay. But the thing is the man is also kind of showing himself off as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
very
The
it's
clothes
not
are
like
cut for a gym body. There is a definite sense of that, and what I think is great about him is he's so positive, and he obviously loves what he does.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of that kind of like dreary, oh god, we have to do this again. You never feel that way.
Yeah, he's having a great
time. And also, basically, his clothes sell like hotcakes,
Yeah.
and men want them. So he's obviously doing something that is relevant, even if it's not in that kind of sphere that we think of as being kind of like edgy or modern or whatever. It's like it's the complete flip of Raf, but it still has a real place in fashion,
and it's a real diverse customer as well. It's
Is it?
Yeah, completely diverse. I mean, from a footballer to the gay guys, we're getting everyone coming in buying them at the moment.
Yeah.
And even young guys are trying to save up to buy a pair of Balmain jeans. And
that's interesting. I think I spoke to you about this. Was it you that said even like the Rick Owens shopper sometimes buys it? Yeah, that's
there's a big crossover between Givenchy, Balmain, Rick, even like the Off-White guys. When you talk about adjacencies in store, they're the sort of
which you can totally see in like a pair of like track pants or something, isn't it? A black pair of track pants, exactly. Like that are cut, given a fashion cut.
Yeah.
I hope for Olivier's sake that he can find kind of some calm in it, because he gave some quotes to Luke Leach from Vogue Runway afterwards, and I think he's starting to get quite just can't find his place in the amount of criticism he gets and the amount of like. Why
does he get so much criticism?
Well, because it's easy to make fun of, and I made a joke about it because it's easy to make a joke about it. But then I said I really liked it and appreciated the work, but if you don't like it, it's even easier to make jokes about.
Yeah.
So it's one that it's just easy to dismiss like that, and I hope he can deal with that in a better way, because there were rumours. I think it was WWD had stories that the people who own it might be trying to sell it. And, that thing has happened with him where he's gone through this period, and now he needs to find the peace in what he's doing rather than it being a turmoil. And the other thing with the show as well is it was that thing which keeps happening in menswear shows where they put female models in it on heels like this in some dress where they can't walk.
There's one who literally
can't walk, and so the male models are sent out at the same pace, and the male model has to do this like really slow motion walk, so he gets his time in front of the cameras down here, and we sat there with this poor woman trying to.
There was that black velvet dress, like a really, it's like fishtaily, and it was
along.
Like I felt so bad because she kept her face like, I'm fabulous.
Yeah,
You could tell in her head it must have been like one of the worst moments of her life.
Torture.
Yeah. And
it's that thing of like when there's, because men aren't in heels, they're in flat shoes. You want a female model in a menswear show to have the same level of comfort and pleasure, and a sense of ease.
Or you just need whoever cues the models to like.
No, but I actually think when you're putting womenswear and menswear, when we get to Givenchy, it's the same thing. When you show womenswear and menswear, there has to be something relatable.
But I take issue with Prada with that sometimes, because it does. I love Prada, but it does feel sometimes like the models are like trussed up, and I felt that a little bit at this show. The girls were in, like, they looked very, very young looking girls. They were some of them were wearing quite tight or very short things. They were in such high heels, and some of them were like, one of them kind of tripped at the end, and they were kind of hobbling along, and I thought it was quite strange.
The great thing about the Prada set was that when there was a female model here, there was a men's one here, so I was just looking at men's.
Yeah,
so I never look at the women's models, because I'm there for menswear. So.
Yeah,
I guess that's what you meant by dated with this, right? In terms of
it's kind of what
where
I mean.
It pitches masculinity and femininity.
Yeah, it is the pitch.
But it's probably more people think like that than think, let's all be open and much more
almost
open
definitely.
And more people that see the world in
like
this way,
yeah.
And I think that's kind of something that fashion in particular, fashion writers, critics, or whatever, tend to not want to have to think about.
But also, sexiness is always seen as like backwards or stupid or like low in some way.
Yeah.
I just think it's interesting because I was looking at the show. it was actually afterwards, not while I was at it, and I was thinking how differently I would have looked at the menswear if the female models hadn't been in it, because I interpreted it as a lot more kind of masculine and confrontational, because there were girls coming out in between them in cocktail dresses, so it looked like the girls were their dates, or and the girls looked so fragile, as we said, they could barely walk. But actually, if the female models hadn't been in it, there's much more diversity in the type of man who's presented in this. I think that's what I find interesting.
I think one other thing as well, which is super boring, but like it, actually looking back on it now, the amount of velvet in the show, having seen Saint Laurent last week in LA, like I think velvet as a trend thing.
It's totally a trend.
It's a message.
Is a thing.
You're going to buy the velvet Grace Wells bonnet.
Oh my god, I love the velvet Grace Wells bonnet. It's amazing.
All you talked about all through Paris.
I got it on and I was really thinking, can I just walk out with this on, because it is amazing.
It's really, really good. Bauman does well.
I mean, I've never liked velvet though, actually, just to go back to velvet before. And I don't know whether it's just because I kept seeing it everywhere, and then I stumbled upon this amazing jacket. But it always feels like it's that thing where everyone tries to wheel velvet out at Christmas, Zara and those kinds of places. Because like, oh, you must buy a velvet jacket in burgundy and put it with some jeans. But this season, for the first time, I thought, actually, maybe this might be something that people might want to buy, not in that kind of way, like the Heide Ackermann bomber jacket shape, which is a very him shape in velvet. Kind of, I mean, it's not my thing, but I can kind of see that it might be something that people might want to buy this season.
I wasn't mad on the Heide show this season. I thought it was, I love it usually, but I just thought it almost felt like costume and a little bit comedy.
But I think the thing that's happening with Heide is that it's settled down as a show which is for people who like Heide. So Heide isn't looking to give you an access into it. It's not a show which is looking to evolve and grow beyond the world of Heide, which I think is something. I think when he suddenly started getting attention in women's wear, it looked like people were trying to find a new thing that would evolve and become something else. But Heide is Heide, and I think if you like Heide, you'll find stuff you like in this show, and if you don't, you don't. And I think that's
disciples, isn't it?
Yeah, and what we were talking about yesterday in terms of like brands knowing where, not having to be forced to grow, and you know, it's if you like Heide, you like it. So
I always like Heide a lot more when I see it in the showroom.
Yeah.
I mean, the last show I actually really liked, because it was in such a beautiful.
That was lovely.
And the sun was setting, and it was all that kind of Paris pretty stuff. But when you actually go into the showroom and you see it, it's kind of a bit like, I could take one of those and one of those and one of those and one of that. But as a show, I don't know, like I must admit, I agree with you, I wasn't as into this one. I think I also found the hair thoroughly distracting. And
I love it. The shoe is always foul. Always the most awful sort of winkle picker weird shoe. But the whole other thing from the ankle up, I just love how it's sort of artisanal and it's sort of poetic and it's tactile.
So I don't find it. I find it exactly like poetic, tactile. I'm intrigued by like the life, and you imagine that guy and what he does. This one, that guy didn't seem so cool. He seemed a bit cringe. Like you were like,
I think the hair was really off-putting. Like, you know, I just was a bit like, oh god, I can't get past it. Sorry. I'm random.
Should we talk about Kim?
Yes, let's talk about Louis Vuitton. I felt it was an interesting one for Vuitton because I felt like last season was going to be a tough one to top because it was such a kind of performance and everyone loved that collection and it's been everywhere. And then I thought this was really, really amazing, and I thought it was really respectful because it was all about kind of Paris as a city and a community and a hub, and I just loved it. I thought it was really, really beautiful. And I think what he does is so good. I think our designers fulfilling, I'm a massive Kim fan, but in terms of designers like fulfilling their briefs of what they do in their job, like he does that so well.
I love the murkiness of the colour which is in the suiting, and there's some really dull, ugly browns and blues, and it was purposefully dull, ugly browns and blues that I loved. They actually also were talking about, not just about Paris in terms of past, but Kim was also, he didn't say them by name, but he said the new thing that's happening in Paris. And he's very aware of a new feeling, and I think he's very excited by a new feeling in Paris, because it's a city that he feels quite alien in, and I think it's exciting for him that the city has some sense of like urgency about it again. I mean, the clever thing that Kim does is he always has taken shapes and styles from casual from the 80s and rave and made it totally wearable for a 50-year-old CEO, the guy who actually shops in Louis Vuitton, and actually, which is pretty much the story of luxury fashion over the last few years, he thingy did, whatever the word, but he predates that. But he's always been really good at taking like a bomber jacket or an MA1 and making it so that and making it so that like an exec can go to Vuitton and feel completely safe and not realise even that it comes from rave culture.
I think the point is, he is obsessed with luxury and what luxury means to a luxury customer. And I know everyone's like, what is luxury? What does that even mean? But I think that's what's interesting about it, is it's always about making the garment work as well for the person who buys it as possible. So it's always about how it can be worn or how it can be folded if you're travelling, or how light it is. And that's why I find it quite exciting, because sometimes it is frustrating when you see it people who have jobs at these massive houses where they could be using the resources of that house to genuinely innovate, not in terms of design, but in terms of things like fabrication and like just craft, in terms of like his seamings and his finishes and his buttons are interesting. And I think that's really nice because it justifies the price in a way. And sometimes you get to the end of Paris and you're a bit tired of seeing very expensive clothes. Whereas I always find this quite exciting just because of that. Do you like it, Dan?
I love it. But it's very, it's exquisite, and it's I don't really like the word luxury either, but it's expensive, it looks expensive, and the taste level is just exactly right. And I think that's kind of, to just go on from what you were saying about him doing a good job. He's doing a fantastic job for that world, and as Charlie's picked up on, anyone can go into that, and a businessman or a kind of club kid, and everyone in between can go in and find something that he's putting forward, that he's doing. I really like the flourishes of this collection. The diamonds that were done by Jade Jagger. All the kind of brooches and the messages that were kind of it was saying about how men basically dress. It was decorated. This is a kind of decorated, dandyish kind of man, and again one that also has slightly fallen by the wayside in terms of our focus on what men are wearing right now. So for that way, I liked almost the tradition that it kind of represented in obviously an incredibly sharp modern way.
Should we talk about Rick Owens? Because that was a show that I also thought was very, very interesting. And I was interested with Rick because the reactions to it were really different. Not in terms of, I think most people liked it, but people interpreted it in such different ways. I'm interested in what everyone here thought of it. Are you a Rick fan, Simon? It's very much how you dress, so...
I don't know. I was really late to this, so I kind of couldn't see half of it. But it was, I think everybody had that kind of sense of, he'd been doing these things that were very spectacle orientated, and this one felt much more like let's refine the clothes and not have a big fuss, which I thought was quite smart, because I think everyone has been talking far too much about all the other things and not thinking about what the clothes were like. I don't know, I think I need to sort of see it. I didn't see it in the showroom to really kind of pick it apart, but I thought that some of the shapes were really interesting, and there's always a kind of energy about it that feels so particular to him, that kind of urgency, which I thought was there, and I like that kind of sort of, particularly when you're standing at the back and you can't see properly, what is that? It's...
Didn't feel very fetishy, which I felt like the last few felt very much about sex, whereas this...
It felt really tactile, actually. Just that's the biggest thing I picked up when I was sitting there, was that you always think of it being really hard and harsh. And actually, when you go to the showroom, there is a massive element that's some beautiful cashmere. But the first thing I thought was, there's some really nice pieces come down that you actually just want to touch and feel, and you don't always get that when you're at Rick. You're a little bit standoffish because it is so harsh. But
he's the only designer that I find scary. He's the only time I've been to a fashion show. When he did that Winnie Pooh show,
but he was.
I was genuinely scared. I don't find him scary. He's great. He's lovely. My favourite thing about him as well is when he stays in London, he stays at Claridge's, and it's so sweet.
But the thing with Rick is that Rick has got that thing where it's always been about product. From the very beginning, it's been about great product, and from his very first leather jacket that was short at the back, longer at the front, it's a great product. And this collection was in line with so many shows this season where people were looking at product, because people don't know what the world is going to be like in how many months. And they obviously never do, but this season had a real sense of we just need to focus on what's good. And the interesting thing here was the outerwear again, which was great. I also really liked the little jacket shape,
double-breasted,
which was new for him. And I said to him afterwards, and he said actually maybe he thinks he should have gone a bit shorter, and maybe he'll go shorter next time. And he was playing with product. Obviously, there was this thing here that looked like a sleeping bag thrown out of a window. Like there's still stuff going on.
Why thrown out of a window?
Because it looks like it's. Do you know what I mean?
Ballooning. Okay.
Yeah, but it was a great product show,
Yeah.
and actually really also, he was showing how he just does great interpretations of actually quite recognisable product.
Yeah.
There's nothing particularly scary about his coats. If you gave those coats to someone who took the label out, who would think they would be scared of Rick, they would then be, oh, this is a great coat, I'll wear it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who else should we talk about? We haven't talked about the Dior show. We haven't talked about Skey. We haven't talked about Tom Brown.
Well, look, we've got Givenchy to talk about as well.
Let's talk about Givenchy. Let's jump from Rick to Givenchy. What did everyone think?
Givenchy was
Pink.
Pink.
Definitely.
It's just
Oh, the room.
It's definitely
The
pink box.
room.
Pink
The
and
big
brown,
pink
very
box,
cool.
Yeah.
Givenchy's interesting because I thought the key thing for buyers is that there was new prints that were kind of graffiti-ish.
And the Cobra.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There's elements of
there were new prints that were
Yep.
things that will fly. So with Givenchy, I'm always looking for but what's the thing
new
that's going to
Rottweiler.
sell?
Yeah.
What's the thing that's going to sell? So there were things, and sometimes he shies away from that, pretends that's not happening, and some seasons it's like, this is the new stuff that's going to be on the prints. So that was all great. He would like it to be more of a tailoring brand, and I thought the tailoring looked good. The thing for me was that the woman walking there in the background there, she's in couture, she's in Givenchy couture, and so when you've got someone walking past you in a handmade, individual, unique dress, surrounded by people who are in stuff that's obviously made in a sampling factory, that was an imbalance for me, and I'm not quite sure where that goes.
Yeah, I find that a difficult one because so he first showed the couture with the men's last season.
It really worked last
really
season.
worked.
It really worked.
Yeah,
Whereas
really
this
worked.
season for summer, maybe it's because in summer there are less layers, so you see less things.
You see less
and in
things.
winter
It's
there's
just
coats,
lighter.
there's layers.
Yeah.
And,
But also this was a smaller venue, wasn't
Smaller
it? Much smaller
venue,
venue,
you're
so
much
you were
closer.
focused straight on
Yeah.
what's in front of you rather than the one last time it was interweaving
Yeah.
and lots of different
Yeah.
This
things.
was
So-
much more of a conventional fashion show. It
Yeah.
was painted pink, but
Yeah.
last season was
no,
amazing.
but also last season's couture was actually there were things that were kind of there was dungarees or something, wasn't there?
Yeah,
There were-
last season
there
it's
was-
Naomi wore little black dungarees, and a lot of it was very, very playful. Like it was really sheer. You could see the girls' underwear, which was in the same colour, so it almost looked like cloth over bikini.
Whereas
like
here
it was.
these were gowns.
Gowns,
couture
yeah.
gowns.
Like-
So that was an imbalance to me.
It's a shame though because I think it is a really smart way of showing in some ways, like showing the couture with the men's. It fits well, and last season I was so happy. I was like, oh, that's really great, that's really cool, it's a really good way of doing it. And then this season, yeah, you're right, it didn't mesh quite as well. What did we think of the men's collection though? Do you think, I was intrigued, we were talking about the Cobra and that jacket, which was like the cutouts with it in, was quite something. But did you guys like it as a collection?
I wasn't in love with this collection. I think
No.
it's the worst one I've seen for it. I actually got quite excited about last season's collection.
Yeah.
I thought it was a fresh take on it, and even the putting the suiting down, and we're talking about how you sort of evolving the suiting and bringing elements of sport
Yeah.
into the suiting. I think that worked. It's just something in this just didn't click with me from a commercial point of view. Whether it be the colour palette, 'cause, I think the pink and the browns that came down just.
Yeah.
It just didn't really work for me on that level. I'm not sure if the Cobra is going to take off, and I think that whole thing about the Rottweiler, or if it's a shark, or if it's a Cobra,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's really going to translate with the customer anymore.
Yeah.
I think they're just growing up a
Do you
little
think
bit. I
they've
don't
grown
think
out
they
though?
want that
They've
big.
had enough of the animals.
I think so. I think they've just had enough of big things being plastered over the front of a sweat or a tee.
Which is maybe why going back to Off-White, those chevrons work better because as much as they're very bold, there is a subtlety to them in the
Yeah.
sense of it's
you
not
put an
like
accent of them somewhere.
yeah.
Rather
Doesn't
than-
date as well. I think that's the thing about the
it's an iconic
Rottweiler or these
design,
kind of the
yeah.
Cobra. It kind of puts it into a time frame, and as
Yeah.
we know, kind of people's the frame of reference, especially Generation Z that are coming up. It's like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
you
What
know.
were your thoughts, Simon?
I wasn't really that into it, I have to say. I thought it seemed
Even
like
the velvet cowboy boot.
I wasn't particularly disturbed by that. I don't know. It didn't feel like it came together. It felt like two separate things. And the tailoring was over here, and the sort of Cobra-y, printy stuff was over there, and they never quite met. And I think the girls were a kind of another distraction to the whole thing. So I didn't really know what he was trying to do with it. Really.
Can we talk about Loewe? Do you have images of Loewe?
Yeah, we can talk about
Does it
Loewe.
exist in the image world?
We've got the lookbook images, but then
these.
if you scroll down, we've probably got images that people took when they were there as well. So you can see more of the pieces, like here.
Yeah.
What do you think of Loewe?
I thought it was a really lovely collection.
Yeah.
I was really into it. I have difficulty with Jonathan's work often. I found his work here to be the most contemplative and most considered. Especially there were these long cardigans that have got these panels on the back that were taken from, oh my god, fabric from, was it Indonesia? I think he said. I'd have to check. He got this book of this kind of 400-year-old textiles, and it was a tie-dyeing technique where when women got married, they were given this fabric where a perfect rectangle was tie-dyed, absolutely perfect, using tie-dye technique, and this exquisite fabric, and which then Mark Rothko was influenced by, and he used it for the back of these cardigans, and I found it to be Jonathan allowing ideas to evolve at their right pace rather than scatterbrained.
Well, it was much softer because the others have felt very, very themed. It's like there was like the kind of manga-y, cartoony one and what have you. Whereas this one, I think partly just because it was about kind of nature, there was a kind of earthiness in it. But it was, they are really beautiful. Wow. But then there was it just felt softer, and it felt kind of more like the very first season he did, where it was very earthy. And I think it's better because it did start to feel a little bit gimmicky. It felt like it was all the same stuff, just with a different kind of finish or a different colour. And I didn't feel that at all this season. I really liked it.
I think it can often feel quite silly.
Yeah.
But actually, and the lookbook it has a sense of humour, as you can see. But I think the individual pieces as they were incredibly kind of real.
It's just a weird one because everyone buys the leather goods, but not many people buy the fashion. So
but that's the reality of every house we've talked about so far.
Yeah.
So I mean, let's not beat about the bush. Let's talk for now about bags and shoes. That's.
But I think even more so with Loewe than with some other ones, totally. Which is a shame because you kind of want to see how it does. Like you want it to have a life. And not
you
just
do see a lot of people wearing I've seen loads of people wearing the clothes, the trousers, maybe in a fashion environment, but more than I would have expected to wear those kind of huge wide leg turn up. Kind of cuffed jeans that seem to. I've seen more of those around than I thought I would. Yeah, more than I have the puzzle bag.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm going to the wrong places, but I think I see more of the clothes than actually the bags. But I think everyone now wants an elephant purse, that's for sure, if they didn't already.
Well, the puzzle bag is an awkward shape. I think it's an amazing design. I find it intriguing as a piece of design. But in terms of an everyday bag, I don't know if people would use it in that same way.
Yeah.
It's completely up my street, but I don't know if a luxury bag woman wants something that people admire for its design, not because it looks like a luxury object.
But I think what's really nice about Loewe is that it's a thing, with the books that are produced every season with M&M Paris, the way the shows or the presentations are designed. It feels like it's doing something, and you kind of get to understand. Quite often designers talk about their world and all of that stuff, but I think you can kind of quite understand what's trying to kind of evolve here.
There was also just lots of good clothes in it. Just as in individual things. The first thing I saw was these really nice double-breasted trench coats out of a tweedy fabric with raw edges, and then there was that really nice jacket that was just there with a pocket on it that had been all sort of destroyed, and then there was a shirt which he'd developed some sort of burn technique, so it looked like little mini frag burns all the way down, but it was very precise. It just kind of felt like sometimes the whole production of those books, which I love, sort of overshadows what's actually there. But this time I felt like there were things that really stood out on their own, and you didn't necessarily need to see them in context to understand what the good clothes in the collection were.
I mean, my one proviso with it always is with his work is that I would love the fit to just be a little bit more special, and I think that would help things sing. And I think when you look on the website, especially the leather jacket stuff, it kind of looks a little bit too wide, and a little bit like, why isn't that not a little bit more finished off?
Refined.
I think that's a general decision he makes about things.
My favourite thing with the show is because they'd like blocked out all the windows and put that insulation so it felt like you were in a cave. I spoke to the design team and she was like, we're all going mad, it feels like you're in IKEA. They were literally like snapping. She was like, we don't know what time of day it is, we've been here all day. It was quite funny. There's a few people we haven't talked about. I'd really like to talk about Tom Brown because I just thought it was amazing. And I know like Tom Brown, you either love it or hate it, and I used to find it quite difficult, but when you're at something like this show, I just thought it was so amazing, like as a show, but also the clothes, like when you went and looked at them, like
just the work.
It's amazing, and
dog bags that made an appearance at Women's as well.
On a roller dog. It's lovely.
And that's actually him and his and Andrew's dog. He's called I can't remember the name of it.
Hector.
It was a proper show again, wasn't it? It was, it had a story to it. You were sitting there just waiting for the next thing to happen, and although I think if you're sitting from a distance till you got to the close up afterwards, it just seemed like everything was going down. It was very, very similar. But really once you get up, and I love that when they lead the close out at the end of the show, just to really get an up close and personal.
So we should say basically what's going on here is that, and actually it actually works perfectly with this because it's shown in threes. So the first two guys came out, and they were meant to be. There were the set with these big frames that had got cloths over them, and it was meant to be a couple going back to their country home, their country mansion. And they pulled off all the cloths in this very ceremonial way. Then they went and sat in the middle, and then out came these three looks. I mean, in normal pacing, but it was the first one was the most dishevelled,
and they got less and less
dishevelled, and then the most perfect version of the garment. So we saw first that one on the left with that kind of, is that one, the one with the knit in it? I can't see. And he basically was making perfect clothes that had been looking destroyed, and then the less destroyed than everyone. And it was about time and the passage of time and how you relate to garments and how you wear garments and how garments age, and basically then the models went and stood either side of the frames as if with a mirror, and the one who was perfect then was looking at the two versions of himself as he ages, and it made you think about aging and made you think about life, and it was the last show of the season, and to leave on something that makes you think about something other than, oh, that's a nice suit.
I also think it's interesting when you think of a designer like Tom Brown, because that's a very personal message as well, because he does make the kind of clothes that aren't seasonal and you do buy and live with for a long time, and it is there's few designers that can talk about like hand-me-down factor, but he's actually someone that can engage with that, so it felt like a very relevant message.
It's also like, it's interesting to say hand me down, because the thing is, like, he's not got anyone to hand it down to. He's living life of a gay man, and actually the thing that Tom does is he's very, very clear on the fact that this is the life he leads, and he's going to make clothes for it. I'm not saying I mean it as in terms of like, it's not it's fitting with the way that he sees living his life in his world, and that's the loveliness about this show as well, is that Andrew Bolton, his partner, was there, and it does seem to be so personal and so much about experience and storytelling and an uncompromised life and living a best sort of life, and being quite proud of wearing clothing within that,
and being proud of dressing up as well, like, and manners and appropriateness. And I find that it's something that I love it when Miuccia Prada really thinks about appropriateness. I think it's a really interesting theme, and like this show was about that a lot. And if you think of someone like Andrew Bolton's role as a curator in the job he does, like, he's such an encyclopedic knowledge of why we wear what we wear and what's appropriate to wear and the rules of dress, and that can't help but filter through. And I think there's an honesty in how much they like draw on each other's work, which is really interesting.
It's thrilling to watch. Also, we should say about the hats, which are done by Stephen Jones, and their bowler hats. They've got punctured through so they could actually see. But they were just held in. He said I think they were held in by a couple of pins. Or something.
A couple of pins.
It wasn't that much. But
I've interviewed them together for my book that I'm doing, and them together is amazing. The way that Stephen and Tom interact, it's fantastic.
I think the lovely thing about Tom, because it's been such a strange path he's taken, and he's been so influential in menswear and completely uncredited, because people call it Mad Men, whereas actually it's him. And that programme, used a look which he had found. He'd use whatever was influenced by, whatever word I meant to say. But Tom is the one who completely changed suiting by cutting away the excess. And he had such an important influence on 21st century fashion. But then when he realised he'd done that, a bit like when Rick realised he couldn't keep just doing the same leather jacket, and he went off somewhere else. Where Tom went, everyone hated, because he thought, how dare you be so frivolous and so weird with fashion. And it's really nice that he's come to a place where people actually appreciate the individuality of the work. It also happened when about 2-3 years ago they started making a commercial collection which sells the whole time, which is the tracksuit with the three bands and the trousers and the thing. So you can always go and buy the basic Thom Browne look, and it flies.
There's an amazing photo on. I met this lovely guy in Paris who does. I think he does Tom's social media. I've forgotten his name, but I will tweet it so people could look at it. And there's a photo of all the Thom Browne team playing football.
And the other team is the head office team as well.
I was like, that is amazing. They're all wearing it. I loved it so much.
I've been in a cafe and like they've been there a few days before the show, and it's like that's the Thom Browne team. Like, they were just sat looking amazing in their suits.
So cool. We haven't talked about, there's a few things that we haven't talked about, but I'm very conscious of time. We didn't talk about Dior, Skey. We haven't talked about Valentino. Is there anything that people want to especially jump on?
I thought Ganry was great. Ganry was there. Ganry was one of the Comme des Garçons brands. He was back in Paris, which was lovely to see. It's always great to see him there.
Was it a good Paris? It's given us lots of stuff to talk about.
Yeah, I love Le Maire, which I know is probably a bit boring, but I just think
I love Le Maire too.
I thought it was especially a strong show.
Yeah, it's just really beautiful, and the red, and just the guys just looked really relatable.
Well, I think it was because he'd done it in a very different way, like the way he'd made them like kind of walk and look at people.
Yeah,
it felt
weirdly
very,
the still pictures don't do the clothes justice. But if you watch the video and you see them sort of swaggering,
they
and
moved really well.
A couple of them had quite quirky walks, but
and the steps
one of them
kind of really worked.
Well, they kind of galloped up the steps, didn't they?
But you got a sense of this volume that he kind of loves.
I really loved it because
it
made you think of men in the street. You know, when you see someone and they look really great, and you kind of like survey them, and they kind of maybe make eye contact, keep walking, like jump into a doorway or go up some stairs. That's how they moved through the space, and I thought it was very subtle but very clever, because that's exactly what his clothes are about. It's just like blokes looking really good and nice kind of simple stuff that you wear and you look very nicely dressed. And I thought it worked really, really well, whereas other shows perhaps felt a little bit too formal or it's not enough punch.
I mean, I'm always really interested in clothes that make you kind of almost forget the guy's clothes, the wardrobe. You kind of look at him when you look at those clothes. They kind of frame whoever he might be. You're not really thinking, oh God, I really love your jacket. You actually look at the jacket that you love, and then you want to know who's wearing it. And I think, again, that's not necessarily a particular kind of trend-related thing or seasonal thing, but I think that's what Le Maire is just incredibly good at. Yeah.
Just felt like he clarified the vision a bit as well. It was very clear, like, and those things that he's starting to do quite regularly, certain shapes and fabrics, just kind of felt really like that had been done in a very kind of sharp, quite organised way, I thought.
Yeah. I
thought Simon Lee was great, who's a young designer from New York, and he did a little presentation.
Don't think we have pictures of it.
It's spelled Ximon Lee.
Lee.
And it was his first presentation in Paris, and he was great. Really nice look at volume and fabric, and he's great.
So worth a look.
Yeah.
So if we had to kind of, you can never really sum up a season, but what were the things that we've walked away from the season thinking about? It's weird because, as I said at the start, like it all happened and everything I was thinking about kind of got flipped on its head because of Burberry announcements and what have you. But were there things that we came away from this season kind of musing on or pondering?
I thought it was the clearest season for ages.
Yeah,
it's a buyer's season, it's a customer's season, it's a shopper's season, it's a season about product that is easily relatable, and we won't be sitting here in a few months' time going, oh God, did anyone really buy that? It's like, it's really clear that it's great coats, it's double-breasted jackets.
We struggled the last few seasons, we do trend packs every season and present to press, and it's just repetition season after season, where this season felt a little bit fresh, and it felt, as you said, the outerwear was so strong, the shearlings were amazing from a number of collections, so there were clear, identifiable trends and pieces that you can really sort of pick up, and they're all pretty commercial as well.
I mean, as we know from recent movements, the retailer is starting to really shape the runway or catwalk, and this kind of goes along with that sort of mood for menswear. There's always a kind of a sense of components, things that can be clicked together, product as we've called it here. But there is something about I did love Paul Smith.
Paul Smith was great.
It was really nice.
It was a good, and also again about great product. But also, it's not actually retailers; it's customers. It's relationship with customer. It's relationship with the man who buys it. and this also felt a really strong connection with a man who wanted to buy Bibles, both in the past and also a young man who wants Bibles.
It's been getting really good for the last few seasons.
Yeah. No, it was a really good show.
Well, I'm conscious of time, so should we give everyone a round of applause for giving us so much to talk about?